I want to personally thank the choir for the beautiful music that they have offered this morning. I could not have asked for more beautiful choices to go with what I hope to share with you this morning. The last song that they just sung, Be Like the Bird, is actually part of a poem written by Victor Hugo in the Songs of the Dusk. One of the translations that I found describes it like this. It begins as Hugo and a friend enter a 300-year-old church at dusk. Hugo evokes the calm, echoing emptiness by describing in some detail all of the people and sounds who were not present, like the organist and the choir. His companion seems sad. She's listening to the joyful words of the villagers outside the church. Their theme is this: life passes quickly, enjoy yourself now. And yet the companion's expression is saying, pray. She speaks softly. How can I enjoy myself when only God is real, and I'm so frightened and suffering? I have no friends, no lovers. I've been duly religious, but still everything breaks under my hand. Everything trembles under my feet. Everything I lean on collapses. Hugo decides to speak to the woman, but quietly in case she is listening to some other, better voice. Why are you, a charming woman, so sad? What does it matter that life isn't fair? You have your soul, which perhaps soon will flee to heaven, carrying you away from your sorrows and from the murmurings of these people. Then comes the final lines. Be like the bird who, pausing in her flight on a limb too slight, feels it give way beneath her, and yet sings and sings and sings, knowing she has wings. The passage reminds me of an afternoon I spent with a nun at the Sisters of Loreto convent several years ago. Her name was Sister Anne, and she was about 90 years old at the time. I had made several retreats at the convent and came to know Anne in long conversations as she and I talked and painted together in the afternoons. So that you might better appreciate the treasure that Anne was for me, you need to know a little bit about her. She was a plain little woman who came out of the middle of the Kansas corn country to become a novice at the novitiate that was actually there at the Sisters of Loreto. That's where the young novices used to do their training. She was not easily formed as a nun. She had her difficulties. The Sister Superior was always giving her difficulty about the fact that her wimple was not clean. Her habit was wrinkled, and much to her dismay, she could not seem to get her toes tucked under her habit, as was the expected discipline for young novices. Anne said my feet were just too big. In one conversation, Anne just sort of fleetingly made this comment when she was serving at the convent in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She let it kind of slip in there that she had served as superior there. And I said, wait, Anne, I never knew that you were serving as Mother Superior. She says, oh, dear girl, they would never have let me be mother. I was far too bad. Apparently it had something to do with sneaking pizzas into the novices in the middle of the night. She was funny and was the most joyfully irreverent spirit I have ever known. She was a gift to me in a time when I was really struggling with what, if anything, I could put my faith in. One morning after Mass, I took her in the convent's golf cart down to sit by the pond there on the property. I don't remember what we were talking about. I'm sure it had something to do with my latest existential angst. And she looked at me and she asked me the question, "Do you pray?" I didn't know how to answer her. The prayers of my experience had been from the Lutheran church that I was raised in, which were part of the catechism that we learned in confirmation. And all other prayers in the church were delivered by the minister. We didn't speak prayers. It was the minister who spoke the prayers. My only other experiences, except for those in listening to the prayers during Mass at the convent, were those that I call my AAA prayers. These were the ones that I cried out when I broke down on the side of another dark road I had taken, and I needed God to get me out of one other mess I had gotten myself into. And so finally I told Anne, I don't think I know how to pray. We were there watching the turtles and sunning themselves, the water gliders striding across the surface of the water, listening to the frogs and the birds sing and the grasses blowing in the breezes. Suddenly, a great blue heron took several gangling steps across the surface of the water and spread its wings and flew right across in front of us. And I sighed, "Oh, how beautiful." And Anne chuckled at me. That, my dear girl, is prayer. Beyond my outward expression of awe and wonder, Anne taught me that prayer, at its most fundamental, is that breath held deeply, poised on a delicate branch of the soul, waiting in the inmost part of our being for its moment to take flight. According to Gandhi, prayer is the inner voice which cannot be described in words. Sometimes we have a positive feeling that something in us prompts us to do a certain thing. The time when I learned to recognize this voice, he said, was the time I started to pray regularly. Gandhi also said, prayer is not asking. It is a longing of the soul. It is a daily admission of one's weaknesses. It is better to pray to have a heart without words than words without a heart. Soren Kierkegaard says, the function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who is praying. One of my favorite writers is Howard Thurman, who wrote, "There is something in every one of you who waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have." Prayer, as I have come to see it, is an attempt to touch what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the spark of the divine that is in all of us. The sense of presence of the sacred that lies beyond us as well. It is part of our human condition to reach both within and beyond ourselves when it comes to finding true meaning in our lives, when it comes to finding what is really real for us, when it comes to discovering what ultimately sustains us, makes us whole persons. Prayer, addressed to a deity or not, provides a means of integrating our mind, body, and spiritual selves. It can provide us with a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves, whether or not we define it or name it. We UUs get bogged down in the who and what to address our prayers. We get so bogged down that we miss the wonder of what it means to have a prayerful life. I read of a devout atheist who says that when he begins his creative work, he says a prayer to himself to remind himself that he is most creative when he ignores the rules of the craft that he has been taught. If his name were Joe, his prayer might be, Joe, ignore the rules and work from your heart. It is a perfectly wonderful prayer. However we go about it, prayer is simply a means to express the universal human need to be mindful of the mystery that represents the highest good, calling us to respond with our best selves. By whatever name you call it, be it spirit of life, the force, God, the great whatever, or simply Joe. It really doesn't matter except on a personal level. What matters is opening the heart, mind, and soul to that which is greater than oneself. Whether one believes in a traditional God or not, most of us, I believe, do feel within us, even if we cannot fully articulate it, some sense of connection with a force, power, or presence that is greater than us. As we look for ways to meaningfully live within that great presence, we do indeed, as the late UU minister, Reverend Gordon McKeeman, once put it, find ourselves addressing a mystery. Reverend McKeeman expands on his point by noting that one addresses mystery by going to the end of certainty, to the boundary of all that we know, to the rim of uncertainty, to the perimeter of the unknown which surrounds us. This is one of the ways of God that works for me, God as mystery. To Father Eckhart's word, I would add these of the late Raymond Bon, a Unitarian Universalist minister. Giving thanks has nothing to do with who or what produced the gift. It is rather a way of perceiving our life. Even in the midst of hurt and disappointment, when we see ourselves in a universe that gives life and touches us with love, we praise. I like that. My prayer of thanks is not addressed to a deity. It's my way of perceiving life even when life wounds, disappoints, and angers me. The kinds of prayer is an attempt to maintain an attitude of gratitude rather than the words dispatched to a supreme being. A prayer of thanks is a way of seeing and knowing ourselves in a universe that gives us life, in which we find care and inspiration even in the midst of struggles, defeats that inevitably befall us. Anne Lamott writes, and I'm sure we can all agree with what she calls a wow prayer. It is the moments when we've been taken out of ourselves to the point of feeling some mystical kind of tie with all that around us that engulfs us. Quiet moments of awe at a particularly magnificent sunset, holding your child or your grandchild for the very first time. For Clemson fans, winning the second national championship. Except for the Clemson fans, these are unarticulated prayers, moments that when that which is within us connects with that which is beyond us. Several years ago, I had a remarkable experience at a place called Bas del Apache Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico. The refuge is made up of a series of wetlands that were created by the Army Corps of Engineers around the Rio Grande to provide critical stopover for migrating waterfowl. Situated in the valley between the Chupadera Mountains to the west and the San Pascal Mountains to the east, the refuge is well known for the tens of thousands of cranes and geese and ducks who winter there each year. I had never heard of the place one afternoon in November when I crossed the paths of a couple on a trail while viewing some petroglyphs in the Salinas Valley southeast of Albuquerque, New Mexico. As I was packing up my car, I heard them talking about going to see the crane fly in at Bas del Apache. With a full afternoon ahead of me, I wasn't expected in Albuquerque until that night, I decided to follow their lead. I arrived at the ranger station just in time to jump on the last van transporting all manner of birding enthusiasts out to the wetlands and the berms that divided each of them. They dropped us off, and there were literally pond after pond after pond just teeming with waterfowl. And this was just before sunset. I was there, not really knowing what to expect. I was fascinated by all the birds that were there before me. But around me were birders with big cameras and binoculars and all sorts of books where they were recording the lists for their birds that they had sighted. And I was just simply there to find out what was going on. I heard the ranger talking into his microphone and into his radio. And what was happening is that there were rangers down the way, further beyond where we were standing. And we were given the signal that, wait in a moment, the first flight is coming in. And in just a couple of minutes, the sky above us literally erupted with Canadian geese. It was the most amazing thing I have ever seen. It was magical. I mean, thousands of them just flying in, gawking and noisy and beautiful. And you could literally feel the wind of their wings flapping over our heads. In the midst of all that cacophony, we were told to wait yet again. And a few minutes later, the ranger's radio squawked again. And in the very next moment, thousands of sandhill cranes flew above our heads. They came in just as the sun was setting, and the pink and the orange was shining on the bottom of their brilliant white feathers, and it was magical. The sun setting across the mountains, and these birds, so many birds, flying in to Bas del Apache. That is what Anne Lamott calls a wow prayer. That is that moment of absolute majesty and magnificence that we experience in so many moments in our lives. That is that prayer that sits on the delicate little branch of our spirits, waiting to be expressed. Every time I see a rookery of herons and cranes, or watch the V formations of geese and ducks headed south in the fall, I am reminded of what I wrote in my journal about that remarkable afternoon. It was in the newsletter, and I want to share it with you. Imagine the promise beating in the breast of the stilted crane, the inner knowing that lifts its great wings in flight, the asseveration among thousands that southward lies the sun, the prayer that is the distant call of ages. To encounter such moments is a blessing and an awe, even if there are no words spoken. It is an experience to be remembered and to be held. But I'm suggesting that beyond the simple prayers of thank you and help and wow, that in our lives on a daily basis, we go deeper. I ask you to give some consideration to a spiritual practice of prayer as a place in your life that it may open yourselves to what our earlier hymn called the Spirit of Life. Come unto me. Specifically, I would suggest that you either find a prayer that you like, modify it to suit you, write one if you feel the creative call to do so, or simply read a passage that has meaning for you and sit with the words. Sit with them and allow them to open that place inside of you. If you do, I caution you to focus on the meaning of the words you are praying and not just to recite them by rote, since if you do, the words will have power and meaning. Sit with the words without making judgments and getting bogged down in theological language. Simply allow them to speak to you. Over the years, I have spent time with two particular writers that are my favorites. The first is an American Trappist monk, a writer, theologian, mystic, and poet, and a scholar of comparative religions who lived and wrote at the Abbey of Gethsemane, located very near to the Sisters of Loreto Convent that I told you about in Kentucky. Thomas Merton, in his book Seize the Day, Vocation, Calling, and Work. You're going to have to excuse me a moment. My pages are out of order. These are Thomas Merton's words. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have the desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me down the right road, though I may not know anything about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me in the face of my perils. Another of my favorites is Howard Thurman, an African-American author, theologian, and civil rights leader. He wrote in his book, For the Inward Journey, despite the dullness and the barrenness of the past, if I search with due diligence, I can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But I had forgotten. At the time, it was full-orbed, glorious, and resplendent. I was sure that I would never forget it. In the moment of its fullness, I am sure that it would illuminate my path for all the rest of my journey. I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed to be so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, and authentic, but little by little there crept in my life the dust and the grit of the journey. Details, lower level demands, all kinds of cross currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been a direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, I would have fought to the end and beyond. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather and in foul, in good times and in tempest, in days when the darkness and the foe are nameless and familiar, I may not forget that which to my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my highest resolve. Both Thurman and Merton are contemplative men. Were contemplative men who lived out their lives in prayer. My point is that prayer is not something to be trotted out at the moment's dictate. Prayer is a patient practice. It is about abiding and listening for the voice still and small. Prayer is an instinct we all carry within us. It is the human experience of nature calling us to our better selves. But it requires practice. Be it contemplative prayer, meditation, quiet, reflective walks in the woods, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that we step away on a regular basis, daily if you can, to open the window and stand on the ledge of the mystery, and to take that leap of faith, and to trust that someone, something, will reach out a hand and show you a place to land. I will close with Anne Lamott's words. You've heard it said that when all else fails, follow directions. So we breathe. Try to slow down and pay attention. Try to love and help God's other children. And hardest of all, at least for me, learn to love our depressing, hilarious, most decent selves. We get thirsty people water, read to the very young and the old, and listen to the sad. We pick up litter and try to leave the world a better place for our stay here. Such are the most basic expressions of prayer. Amen.